If you've been watching Slovakia's politics for some time now, chances are that you don't really have any illusions anymore about how the country and its democracy by extension is doing. Spoiler alert, it's shit. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico has always been eager to climb up the career ladder as fast as possible and unscrupulously seize power whatever it takes. In the 1980s, he became a devoted USSR-loving communist sycophant so that he would have a chance to become a high-level state prosecutor in the communist system. And after the revolution of 1989 that did away with Fico's communist friends, he briefly played the role of a rather progressive social democrat. When he lost power in 2020, he turned to right-wing conspiracy theories, because of course he did, and he attacked the very democratic system that actually enabled his power grab in the first place. Which might also explain this. Fico's recently found passion for shaking hands with the war criminal residing in the Kremlin currently. Or I mean, does it? Because until now, Russia, the country that unlawfully attacked Ukraine, had actually been sending gas to Europe, which also includes Slovakia, of course, through the territory of Ukraine. So the country that it itself attacked. And I mean, it wouldn't probably surprise you that Russia actually used to make shit tons of money thanks to that transit of gas through Ukraine, whose territory it was stealing at the very same time. And the Russians then used the money they got thanks to the gas transit through Ukraine to bomb even more kindergartens inside of Ukraine. And of course, Ukraine finally got fed up with this because, I mean, why should you help finance a war against yourself, right? And turned off the gas taps. And that is also where we get back to Slovakia, because you see, Slovak PM Fico, in his quest to hold on to power whatever it takes, has never been a stranger to spreading conspiracy theories, including about Ukraine, of course. And he's basically been repeating Kremlin propaganda all along. And I mean, we've heard it all. Just 2 days before Russia unleashed its full-scale war back in 2022, Fico actually declared that it would never happen, and he actually called anyone who'd been warning against Russia's imminent plans to attack fearmongers. And unsurprisingly, when the attack did start, Fico himself said that it was actually Ukraine's Nazis who'd started the war. And of course, now with the gas taps off, the Slovak PM is again blaming Ukraine, not Russia, for, as he says, causing an energy crisis in Slovakia. And now he's even threatened Ukraine with retaliation, including cutting off electricity supplies going from Slovakia to Ukraine, stopping all humanitarian aid to Ukrainians living in Slovakia, or even vetoing any future aid to Ukraine on the EU level. I'm Jan, this is Prague Pulse, and today let's take a look at whether or not Slovakia under Fico has been behaving like an enemy of Ukraine, why that is, and what the consequences can be for Slovakia, for Ukraine, and for the entirety of Europe. But before we start, I have a favor to ask. You see, my data actually shows that around 90% of you watching this video right now are not subscribed to the channel. So please, if you like what I do, even a little bit, hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel would really mean a lot to me, because it helps me grow immensely, and it takes a second of your time. And also a huge thank you to those of you supporting me already on herohero.co/practicals. And now, let's dive in. First, let's get the facts straight. On paper at least, Slovakia has been a full-fledged member of both the EU and NATO. And both organizations have been supporting Ukraine both militarily and economically. And that has so far included Slovakia as well. You see, Fico may like to talk tough, but when it comes down to business, Slovakia has so far always supported aid to Ukraine and also further sanctions against Russia. Plus, in its policy statement, Fico's own government actually admits that the Russian aggression against Ukraine is a gross violation of international law, and it even claims to support the return to Ukraine's internationally recognized borders. So that also includes Crimea and the whole of the Donbass. So, written statements would have you believe that Slovakia is really an ally of Ukraine, because they claim all of this, right? I mean, you could believe so if you knew nothing more about Slovak politics at all. Because you see, at the same time, what Fico says doesn't really inspire much confidence at all about whose side he really is on. Because Fico has publicly said time and again that Ukraine cannot win this war, will certainly lose territory, and as we've just seen, he's also repeated Russian lies about why the war started in the first place. Just a few days ago, he said again that he's not even sure who to blame for the war starting. And just before Christmas, Fico went to personally see the war criminal and the main cause of the war in the Kremlin. The visit was actually the first meeting between the two in 8 years. And it was also a trip that Fico apparently hasn't bothered to tell anyone in advance about, not even Slovak President Peter Pellegrini. As you heard heard me, not even the president knew that Fico was actually planning to go to the Kremlin. And with that ass-kissing trip of his, Fico's actually only become the second head of an EU government who've begged to be received in the Kremlin since the war started. And of course, the first one was, you've guessed it, Fico's friend and fellow authoritarian Viktor Orban of Hungary. We've also talked about Orban on this channel quite a lot. Go and watch those videos when you're done with this one. Combine all of that with Fico's recent threats to stop all aid going to Ukraine if the transit of Russian gas doesn't continue, and you have quite a cocktail, right? I mean, it doesn't really seem like what a true ally would do, as long as you're not France or the UK at the Munich conference of 1938, of course. Now that we understand what Fico has been doing, let's take a look at why he's been doing it. Why on earth is the end of the gas transit such a big deal to him? Is an energy crisis really on the books in Slovakia, as Fico keeps on claiming these days? Let's go step by step, shall we? First, it is somewhat true that the gas cutoff through Ukraine is a challenge to Slovakia. You see, Slovakia has been the largest recipient of the Russian gas that used to flow through Ukraine. In the last 4 years alone, around 70% of all of that gas in that pipeline ended up in Slovakia, and around 70% of all gas in the Slovak market was of Russian origin. But, I mean, that's hardly Ukraine's fault, right? Slovakia did have many opportunities to diversify and get rid of its enormous dependence on Russia, just like the rest of the EU did. Take a look at this. Since 2021, so not even that long ago, the share of Russian gas in the EU has dropped sharply from more than 40% in 2021 to just around 8% in 2023. And the share keeps on falling further. Some countries, like Czechia, for example, have managed to rid themselves of Russia almost completely, and instead now import from our true allies, like Norway, while in Slovakia the dependence has stayed enormous. So you have to understand that it was actually Slovakia's conscious decision to stay dependent on Russia. Why, you might ask? Well, because Russian gas was simply cheaper, and Slovakia has been too lazy to look for sources elsewhere. So, I mean, don't blame anyone for your own laziness. It's not like Russia's aggression against the civilized world is anything new, by the way. Putin has been waging a war against Ukraine for 11 years now. It hasn't started in 2022, it's been going on forever. So you've had more than enough time to prepare for this. You've just chosen not to, and now you have to bear the consequences. But I mean, even if we do cut Fico some slack, which he definitely doesn't deserve, by the way, it's not like the Slovaks are now going to freeze to death. Quite the contrary, actually. Because Ukraine had been clearly indicating in advance that it would indeed turn off the taps basically throughout the entire 2024, Slovakia has done some last-minute preparations. Fico's own Minister of the Industry confirmed that the entire gas demand for 2025 will actually be covered, no issue. The minister also said that the gas storages are full enough for the entire year ahead, and it's now also getting more of its gas through Hungary, which, by the way, still receives gas from Russia through the Turk Stream pipeline. And the Slovak state even has contracts with many alternative suppliers, such as the British BP, Shell, or the German RWE. And that all means, of course, that there has been no significant increase of gas price on the Slovak market so far. Yes, I mean, transit through countries other than Ukraine could be somewhat more expensive, just because the actual pipes were the shortest from Ukraine, but it's definitely not heading to an energy crisis like Fico warned. And given how lazy Slovakia has actually been with diversifying over the years, this all seems like a great result, actually, given the circumstances. It has options and it has more than enough supply right now. And that all brings me to this question. If there is really no true energy crisis on the horizon and Slovaks are not freezing to death, why the hell is Fico really so nervous about the situation? Well, and I actually think that there might be two real reasons behind all of this. First, Fico's own coalition government, currently composed of 3 different parties, is now basically on the verge of collapse. For months now, the Prime Minister has faced rebellions from multiple sides. In November, 3 far-right MPs for the coalition Slovak Nationalist Party have left the party's club and stopped supporting the coalition altogether. This has brought down the government's majority majority in parliament to the smallest possible margin of just one single MP. And that in itself would have made pushing the government's controversial agenda very difficult, right? Because you just have a majority of one, and if that one person is missing or not willing to vote with you, you're fucked. To make it even worse for Fico, a second group of MPs, this time 4 MPs of the Halas coalition party, is threatening to vote against the coalition as well. And that would mean that the government would lose the majority altogether and that the government would basically collapse. And Robert Fico is actually well aware of the risks. He himself has repeatedly mentioned the possibility of snap elections taking place this year. So this whole charade around Russian gas may be just a smokescreen to deflect the public's attention from his real problems in the coalition. Because yes, on the one hand, he knows that Slovaks are not going to freeze to death, but he also knows that fanning anti-Ukrainian sentiments may actually be profitable for him in the near future, because it would help him cement his voter base. And the second reason I think Fico has been flipping out is even more important. You see, while Slovakia was importing cheap Russian gas through Ukraine, they were able to make a lot of money in the process themselves. How? Well, because not all of the gas going to Slovakia ended up in Slovakia, right? Some of the gas going through the Ukrainian pipeline to Slovakia went further to Slovakia's neighboring countries like Czechia. So effectively, Slovakia itself partly became a transit country for gas. For that transit, it collected money from its neighbors for allowing the gas to pass through. And obviously now with the taps off, those transit fees for Slovakia are also gone. Fico's government itself claims that it could lose as much as 500 million euros as a result of this, which is a lot of money for a budget of a small-sized country like Slovakia. But again, just as with the gas composition on the Slovak market, is this really Ukraine's fault that Slovakia hasn't been able and willing to diversify its income sources? Hardly, right? So ultimately, we've seen that many Slovak governments, including those under Fico multiple times, have just been too lazy to diversify and get rid of their ugly dependence on Russia. Who knows, in the case of Fico, it probably even suited him because he's been famously pro-Russian to again cement his voter base at home. And presenting the Kremlin as a savior of the Slovak energy sector likely helped him with those people, with the pro-Russian sentiments in the Slovak society that we've also discussed on the channel, and that in turn cements his own grip on power that he's so eager to hold on to. In reality, Slovakia will survive without Russian gas just fine. The public will probably hardly notice any difference now with gas coming from Slovakia's true allies or from Hungary. Prices haven't changed much and gas simply keeps flowing. Yes, Slovakia will likely lose a lot of money on its transit fees because first, it now literally has nothing to transit, and second, the two countries that it used to transit into, Czechia and Hungary, don't really need Slovakia anymore. Czechia imports from true allies like Norway, and Hungary imports from Russia through the Turk Stream pipeline and doesn't need Slovakia anymore. So who knows, maybe even with the taps open, Slovakia's revenues from transit would have decreased anyway because, you know, some countries diversify and not all countries are as lazy as the Slovaks were. And if we look into the future, I would expect Fico's attacks on Ukraine to intensify even more, unfortunately. But not because of gas shortages, because they're not the real issue as we've explained, but mainly because his own political position is now in danger. Slovaks may even go to the polls quite soon, and they could even vote Fico off. And then his impunity and access to enormous sources of corruption would be over, which he simply cannot afford right now. We'll definitely keep watching Slovakia as well as the rest of the region because things are definitely bound to get even more interesting in 2025. So make sure you've smashed that like button and subscribe to the channel. Thanks again to everyone supporting me on herohero.co/fractals. This has been Jan. See you next time.